Okay, so I hope you're seeing my whole screen and not my preview here. So the Lovelace for humans is the flash of genius. This was not my idea, but a lot of these ideas I got from Roger Penrose. Roger Penrose's great book, a the name of the book was The Emperor's New Mind, and really kind of opened my eyes as far as limitations of human beings. Roger Penrose, if you remember, was a Nobel Prize winner that, along with Stephen Hawking, uh, discovered the idea that black holes exist. So the flash of genius. This is what we talked about when Newton said that if he did anything, he did it on the backs of giants. And so what the flash of genius does is measure the creativity above and beyond the backs of giants. So Newton was on the back of giants, but he jumped up and went above the backs of giants and actually made the hill a little bit taller by discovering the rules of Newtonian physics and also invention or co-inventor of the calculus. And so he that was his flash of genius, a contribution above and beyond the accumulated knowledge of the world. So let's talk about the flash of genius and what that exactly means. I we ended the last lecture talking about a few of these flashes of genius. One of them was Archimedes, who ran naked through the street screaming "Eureka, Eureka," which means I found it." And he was interested in a metal worker who was given a hunk of gold and told to make it into a crown for the king. And the king was suspicious that some of the gold had been swiped by the metal worker. And Archimedes could certainly compare the weight of the two, and he did that. And the weight of the crown was the same as the weight of the gold that was given to him. But was that enough? I mean, the metal worker could have added a little bit of lead to the situation and achieved the same weight as the gold that was given, even though if he stole a little bit of gold. So what Archimedes did is he set in a bath of water and a bath of water. Yeah, I guess that's the most common sort of bath, I guess. So he set into a bath, and the water in the tub overflowed. At least this is the story. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. I read this on the web, so it's got to be true. The water overflowed and it hit him. The volume of the water that overflowed the tub was the same as the volume of his body going into the water. So the other thing he could do, besides comparing the weight of the crown with the original gold, he could compare the volume. And it turns out that lead and gold, one of them is more dense than the other. I don't know which is which, but they don't have the same volume per pound. And so he did that. He took the crown, and guess what? The amount of water that it displaced was not the same of the water displaced by the original gold that was given to the metal worker. So as the story goes, the metal worker was executed for stealing from the crown. And we all have Archimedes to thank for that. Archimedes was one sharp guy. So this was his flash of genius, if you will. Eureka. Notice that this came to him just incredibly. It came from nowhere, just from observing something and doing a correlation with that observation with the problem that he was trying to solve. Friedrich Gauss, who is one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, said, "Finally, 2 days ago, I succeeded in solving the problem. Not on account of my hard efforts, by the grace of the Lord." It turns out, this is interesting. A lot of the early mathematicians always gave credit to God for their flash of genius. And this was what Friedrich Gauss did. And I think we talked last time about him adding the numbers between 1 and 100 up and coming up with 5,500 by doing something very clever, which I won't repeat. So he was a sharp guy. Some of the people call him the best mathematician that ever lived. I don't think that's the case. I think Leonard Euler was probably the greatest mathematician that ever lived. Reading on, and this is interesting, like a sudden flash of lightning, the riddle was solved. Now, I call it a flash of genius, but this is a flash of lightning. I am able to say what was the conducting thread that connected what I previously knew and what made my success possible. So this idea kind of came out of nowhere. It wasn't a thread that he had sown, and his unconscious worked on it, his subconscious worked on it, and came up with a solution. It was something totally kind of out of the blue. That's a flash of genius. Nikola Tesla, and on the right, by the way, you see a famous colorized version of Nikola Tesla sitting in these time-lapse photograph of all these electricity volts going from one source to the other. Really a fascinating picture. And Tesla said the idea for the brushless motor came like a flash of lightning. Now, what is interesting here is notice that Tesla and Gauss used the same phrase. I believe that neither of them knew what the other one had said. I believe that neither one of them knew that their flash of genius was described by a flash of lightning. But they both used that phrase. It was boom, there it was. And in an instant, the truth was revealed. I drew with a stick on the sand the diagram shown 6 years later in my address before the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, and my companion understood them perfectly. And by the way, as I mentioned last time, the American Institute of Electrical Engineers was the precursor for the IEEE. In fact, there were two professional societies that merged and formed today's IEEE, and one of them was the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, which, by the way, if you remember, it's the largest professional society in the world. It has over 400,000 members. It was approaching half a million, but it's the largest professional society in the world, and it has chapters everywhere in the world. So it's kind of nice. One of the things about IEEE that I really like is that all of their meetings, all of their conferences have to be in English. And when I was a boy getting my PhD, I had to learn German or Russian. Why is that? Because when I was a boy, all of the great literature in mathematics, science, and engineering was published in English, German, or Russian. So I took German. It was the biggest waste of time in my life. I have no idea of how to speak German, even though I took 2 semesters of it as a graduate student and a year of German as a high school student. And it was a total waste of time. So it turns out because of the IEEE, you guys don't have to do that anymore. There's no language requirement anymore. Why is that? Because IEEE, and I think some of the other societies, I'm not sure, but the IEEE now says that all of the conferences in the world must be given in English. And all of the publications must be in English. So therefore, I don't have to worry about German publications or or Russian publications anymore. To go back in the old literature, I can do that, but shoot, I have Google Translate now that can probably help me with that if I need to. So that's really interesting. One of the first places, I don't believe I shared this, but one of the first places that I encountered this was a meeting in Russia, in Rostov-on-Don. Perestroika has just happened. The Soviet Union was breaking up. And when I was president of the IEEE Neural Networks Council, we decided to have a meeting in Rostov-on-Don because we were contacted by the president of the Russian Neural Network Society. So we had the meeting there, but it was IEEE and it was in English. And none of these guys that were presenting papers spoke in English. So it was really amusing to come to these papers and having a guy with terrible English, broken English, trying to present his slides. And then on the other side, there were other Russians in the audience that didn't really understand English very well, and they were trying to interpret through this broken English. I mean, it was a circus. It was fascinating to hear. But again, now all of the conferences in the world, thanks to the IEEE, are in English. Let's look at other aspects. Here's a guy, Kakul. I don't know how to say his name, but he said he realized that the atoms of the benzene molecule can form a ring falling into a reverse and experiencing a daydream in which he saw a snake eating its own tail. Now, I'm not a chemist, so I don't understand what the specifics of this is, but he had a great insight into biochemistry, and this was a flash of lightning. And notice he also used the term flash of lightning. Three people, Tesla, Gauss, and now Kekul, uh, used the term flash of lightning to explain their flash of genius, this idea which kind of came out of nowhere. And we were just visited by Hal Phillip. He's an old friend, and I knew him in the beginning, but he invented the modern touch screen. He invented the automatic faucet sensor and keyless cars. And he sold his company for millions of dollars. He lives in Zurich, Switzerland right now, but he came to visit my wife and I, and we were able to do a very nice interview. And in an interview I did with him, he said, late at night, lying in bed, tossing and turning and mulling over the problems of the day, what I had to do tomorrow, and just suddenly it materialized. The idea materialized, kind of like a flash of genius. And what he did is he had a chip, and he figured out that they could use this chip in a way that the manufacturer didn't understand. In fact, later he went to the manufacturer and say, I want to buy, thousands of your chips. And I want to do it for this. And they invited him to come up and talk to them. And when they went up, he met with engineers for the company, and you can get the details in the podcast. But he came up and the engineers said, no, what Al Philip is doing won't work. We shouldn't do this for him. But the president of the company actually knew that Hal had sold lots of their chips. And he says, well, might not be the case, but we have the ability to sell through this guy. So I'm going to go ahead and say that, yeah, we're going to be a source for him. So he said, continuing in his quote, he said, it just popped in my head, and it was the most amazing thing that it worked. The idea went against everything the chip manufacturer told you could do with that chip. I also knew at the same time that it would make me wealthy. So Hal did a lot of patents and things, as you see in the beginning, like the modern touchscreen, the automatic faucet sensors, and the keyless car. He later went on to sue Apple because Apple was using his patents in their iPod, which was the early days of doing stuff like that, of playing music. And they used his sensor and his patent there, and he sued them, and he won ultimately. Well, they settled out of court, so that was kind of cool. So yeah, so here's somebody that I know, and we did some work together. Actually, did a couple of papers together before he got rich, and it's kind of nice because after he got rich, he knew that I was a friend of his because we were going to be we were friends. I think if you're really rich and somebody comes up to you and says, I want to be your friend, you kind of think, well, maybe this guy is just after my money. And so because we have a history of when we knew each other before he became a multimillionaire, um, that we have a trust today and a friendship which is still lasting. So this goes to show you that if you have somebody that you know is right and you love them and stay on their side, despite a bunch of stuff happening. When I was a friend with him, we had a lawsuit with Fluke Manufacturing Company. Some of you might know about Fluke. Fluke um, made this equipment to do electronic testing, and they sued Hal. And I wrote the company. And I said, "Give Hal a break, man." And so they didn't like that. He was in hiding because why would you go into hiding? You would go into hiding because you didn't want to get served. You've seen in the movies where somebody comes up and they says, "Are you Hal Phillip?" And they said, "Yes." And then they slap you with a sheet of paper and said, "You've been served." And so you have to be served in a civil suit in order to leverage getting the person to testify. So I was in hiding, so I was deposed. I got little on me. I was deposed for writing a simple letter, and I wrote this letter, and I sent it to I sent it to Fluke Manufacturing Company, and they came back and they weren't too happy about it. But eh, that's the way it goes. But I had to go in and I had to give a testimony. And as soon as I got deposed, I called up Hal, and I knew where Hal was hiding. And I said, Hal, I'm going to turn you in, buddy, because you're sworn to tell the truth. So I went in, and there was a court reporter there because it was all official. It was a deposition. First time I ignored it, but I was getting a patent at the time, and I said to the patent lawyer, "Yeah, I'm not going to respond to this summons." And the lawyer said, "Don't do that." He says, "Let me call up the lawyers," because I skipped one of the deposition times. And my lawyer called me back and he says, "Bob, if you don't go to the next one, they're going to send the sheriff and lock you in jail." So I guess if you ever get deposed, if you ever get served, you better respond to it, even though I was just peripherally involved. So I called up Hal as soon as I learned this, and I said, "Hal, I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell him where you live. I mean, I'm sworn to tell the truth." And he says, "Bob, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." I went in a couple of days later, and they asked me, "Have you spoken to Hal Phillip recently?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "What'd you talk about?" I said, I told him I was going to turn his ass in, and so that was a couple of days before the deposition, and they never did get Hal. And later, Fluke was sued for, oh, what do they call it? Malicious prosecution by a company called Tellon. They were very efficient at going after smaller companies and taking those companies and suing them. And you have a lot of litigation going on with companies like this that just like to sue other people. So Hal ended up leaving the United States, went over to Europe where he took his patents. And that's another interesting thing. One day I went in and I was talking with Hal, and he was signing two sheets of paper. And I said, "Hal, what are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm I'm leasing my patent. I'm giving non-exclusive rights to my company." So one of them he was signing as the patent owner. The second one was for the second one for his company, the president of his company. And it was an agreement between Hal Phillip and Phillip Technologies, which was his company, in order to allow Phillip Technologies to use Hal's patent. I thought, man, that's stupid. But it turned out it was very wise, because when the legal people came after Hal, they came after Phillip Technologies. But he had this barrier between getting involved with getting well, by he had this barrier of losing his patent and to the company, but he couldn't do that because his company didn't own the patent. They only leased the rights to it. So he was able to take his patent over to Europe and do great and wonderful things with it. So that's a fascinating story in my life. So if you ever get served and get deposed, you got to go to the deposition and tell the truth. But before that, you can do anything you want to, like call up the person you're supposed to rat out and tell them you're going to rat them out. So that's that story. Went a little bit over to down a little rabbit trail here, but let's get back on track. We're talking about the flash of genius as kind of the test for uh, for the Lovelace test, the test for creativity. This is where creativity comes from the human. Uh, this is an interesting one. If you get, there was a story by Roger Penrose about one of his flashes of genius, and it was called "Why Did the Mathematician Cross the Road?" It was a podcast, and you can see down here at the bottom left, if you download the slides, you can actually go listen to the podcast. And he said he was walking along having a conversation with a colleague, and he came to a crossroads, and they were talking and talking and talking, and they came to the crossroads and they shut up, and he just stood there and without talking. And then they crossed the street, and Penrose said, "All of a sudden, I had this good feeling." And I wondered why I had this good feeling. He said, "I think it was what I had for breakfast." He didn't know. But later on, it occurred to him. He had a flash of genius. And these flash of geniuses don't occur, according to Penrose, in terms of words or thoughts or pictures. They're just germs of ideas. And he went home and he published it. Had something to do with cosmology. And he went home and he says, "Oh my gosh, this was a flash of genius that he had." And he went home and he published it. And that's one of the stories of Roger Penrose and his flash of genius. Another one was Hoagy Carmichael. You probably don't know Hoagy Carmichael, but he wrote "Georgia on My Mind." That's the official state song of the state of Georgia, by the way. Uh, it was recorded by Ray Charles, and he won an Academy Award. He was a great writer, and maybe his most beautiful song was "Stardust." You've probably never heard it, but he said about listening to Stardust. He says, and then it happened. That queer sensation that this melody was bigger than me. So the point that I'm making here is that flashes of genius not only occur in technology and science, they also occur in the arts. And we're going to go through a few things in the arts. Maybe I hadn't written it at all. The recollection of how, when, and where it all happened became vague as the lingering strains hung in the rafters of the studios. I wanted to shout back at it, "Maybe I didn't write you, but I felt you." So this was a Hoagy Carmichael flash of genius. Bob Dylan, I I think Bob Dylan is an incredible poet. He won the Nobel Prize for his lyrics. He wrote songs such as Blowing in the Wind and probably a number of other songs that you've heard about, but he was just a genius. And he said, songs for me just come out of the blue, out of thin air. I never had a plan to write any of them down. They just fall down from space. I'm just as bewildered as anybody else as to why I write them. So if you've ever written music, you can relate to this. Sometimes the ideas for music just appear. Paul Simon, I don't know if you guys know Simon and Garfunkel, but he's the Simon in Simon and Garfunkel, wrote what I think is one of the most beautiful pop songs in the history of popular music. It's called Bridge Over Troubled Water. And it was, well, you can see here, the Simon and Garfunkel recording was ranked number 48 in Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. It won 5 Grammy Awards, including Song of the Year for Paul Simon. And here's what Paul Simon said: I have no idea where it came from. It came all of a sudden. It was one of the most shocking moments in my songwriting career. I remember thinking, this is considerably better than I usually write. If you haven't heard Bridge Over a Troubled Water, listen to it. It's a great sort of Christian message of being a servant. Really, really a powerful, powerful song. And then the last one, I think, is Tom Petty. And you probably haven't heard of him from your generation. He was with the Traveling Wilburys, which was a super group. And he was also the lead of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And he wrote a lot of pop songs. And he said, it's so hard to understand. I really don't understand, but I do know the best songs often just appear. You're sitting there with your guitar at the piano, and bang, there it is. It just falls out of the sky. I hesitate to even try to understand it for fear that it might go away. So we see flashes of genius not only in science and engineering and mathematics. We see the flashes of genius in the arts. And here's another one that I want to talk about. This is the Beatles' Yesterday. It was written by Paul McCartney, and it has the claim of having over 2,000 covers. In other words, over 2,000 people have recorded this song. And it's it's a nice song, but it was very popular. So Paul McCartney actually talked about when he woke up one day and he had the melody of Yesterday running through his head. So here's a video.
I used to live in this little flat up at the top of a house, in a little room I had, and I had a piano by the bed, and I just woke up one morning with this tune in my head. And I thought, I don't know this tune, or do I? It's like an old jazz tune or something, and because my dad used to know a lot of old jazz stuff. Well, maybe I've just remembered it or somewhere. So I sort of went to the piano, found the chords to it. You know, it was like in G, F sharp minor 7, sort of B and that, and kind of just remembered it, made sure I remembered it, and then I just hawked it round to all my friends and stuff and said, what's this? You know, it's got to be something. It's like a good little tune, you know, and I couldn't have written it because I just dreamed it, you know. You don't get that lucky.
So what Paul McCartney did with his flash of genius is it's something like he found a wallet with $1,000 in it and no identification. He took it to the police station and said, "Look, I found this wallet and I'm going to leave it here. But if nobody claims it in a week, it's mine." And that's what he did. He took the tune to this. He shopped it around to his friends, and nobody said nobody had ever heard it before. And after a week, he says, "Okay, nobody's heard it before. It's mine." And so he adopted the song and later wrote the lyrics for Yesterday. If you haven't heard the song, it's a very beautiful song. Again, over 2,000 covers. So if you go to Alexa and ask it to play Yesterday, I don't know which one of the 2,000 covers that it's going to play, 2,000 different versions of it. It was listed for a while as the most covered song by the Guinness Book of World Records. I'm not sure what the status is today, but it had an incredible number of covers. So this is what we have, the flash of genius. And that is the Lovelace test equivalent for a human being. We don't know how we're programmed, but we can measure creativity, I think, by these flashes of genius. I would also say that you have probably had a flash of genius. And so if you think back, I know certainly I have. And some flashes of genius are more extraordinary than others. So that's what we've covered now is the test for creativity, both in computers and and for human beings. And in human beings, again, it can manifest itself in the arts, it can manifest itself in science or mathematics or engineering. Engineering, for example, with Tesla. Tesla was just a genius. Okay, I'm going to change topics right now and talk about something which you've probably heard about in terms of hallucinations. This is a computer hallucinating that it's human. uh, I hate the word hallucinations. Hallucinations are what responses to large language models are called when they come up with an incorrect or a weird answer. Oh, they're not programmed wrong. They're just having a hallucination. I don't like it because it anthropomorphizes the artificial intelligence, and it kind of feeds into the uncanny valley. It feeds into the scariness of the Frankenstein complex that this thing is kind of human. And anthropomorphization means that you're taking a object and you're trying to make it more and more human. And hallucinations gives that idea to LLMs. And that's not it. The computer made a mistake. It was trained improperly. A guy named Sam Haugen and I did a paper for an IEEE transactions, exponential contingency explosion, implications for artificial general intelligence. And what it basically says is that as the complexity of a system, any system, not only AI, but any other system that you want to talk about, as the complexity of the system increases linearly, the number of ways it can respond increases exponentially. So it isn't, and so if you look at these large language models with billions, maybe trillions of different knobs, it is incredibly complex. So the ways that it can respond are incredibly large. And you would expect that some of these responses that you get from the system are going to be incorrect. And they're very difficult to vet. They're very difficult to check out. So that's a reason that when you go on to get ChatGPT or Grok, they tell you don't trust what we say because we haven't checked out, we haven't vetted everything. So you don't trust large language models like ChatGPT or Grok or DeepSeek. You don't trust them because they hallucinate. No, they're just responding inappropriately. So this is something which needs to be kept in mind for these things, and also is the reason that I have no problem getting into a self-driving taxi that they have currently in San Francisco and Austin. I haven't ridden one yet. My son says he rode in one. It was kind of creepy, but he said it was totally safe. The reason is, compared to large language models, the self-driving car is not as complex. So therefore, it can be tested, and it can be tested to work beyond a reasonable doubt. I don't think you can ever test something to have it work at 100%, but you can test it beyond a reasonable doubt. And certainly, I think these self-driving taxis are that way. And the reason is because of this exponential increase as the complexity grows. Again, large language models have billions, maybe trillions of different knobs that they turn, degrees of freedom. whereas self-driving cars don't have that many degrees of freedom, and they can be vetted and they can be trusted. You still can't trust the large language models. So what is the response to hallucinations from the big AI, these big AI companies? Here's what they do. Uh, they don't have hallucinations, but they they just make mistakes. Here's some mistakes they made from the past. I like these. John's mother had three sons. Their names were Snap, Crackle, and well, if you eat cereal, you know that Snap, Crackle, the last one should be Pop. Their names were Snap, Crackle, and Pop. But if you look at that statement a little bit more closely, it says John's mother had three sons. John's mother had three sons. Their names were Snap, Crackle, and John. So for a while, the large language model responded inappropriately to this and said pop. And now they've put a band-aid on it. So that's what they're doing with hallucinations in the background. Usually people back there kind of turning the crank and trying to put band-aids on the hallucination so that they don't repeat themselves. That's the reason I have on the left there a computer screen with a bunch of band-aids on it. Uh, my friend Gary Smith at Pomona College asked, how many bears did Russia send into space? And Russia did not send bears into space. They'd be much too heavy. I think that they sent monkeys into space. I remember the U.S. sending monkeys into space, but the large language model came back and says yes, there were six bears, and they actually named the bears, and that was a hallucination. But I bet if you went today and you said how many bears did Russia send into space, it's going to respond correctly. Why? Because they put a band-aid on it. Here's another one. It used to be criticized that chat GPTs, learning from examples, couldn't do simple arithmetic. They couldn't add two big numbers. And this was true because if you just do this by the large language model, where you take the spoken language, divide it into tokens, and then train the neural network, if you do it that way, then you're going to have to come up with a specific idea of adding this. You're going to have to come up with this problem being seen at some time in the past. Well, it doesn't do that, and therefore these large language models were terrible at that. So what happened is that they decided to go with something called a mixture of experts, an MOE, mixture of experts. And they use this on Google. For example, if you go to Google and you ask this problem, what is 5,431 plus 6,983? If you go to Google and ask that, it doesn't search the word for a solution. It clicks into a different sort of mode. It kicks into a calculator mode, and you get a calculator up there, and the calculator does it. Doesn't search the web. And that's what ChatGPT does right now. Wolfram wrote a book. Wolfram is the guy that developed Mathematica. And he said that AI, I think I mentioned this, he said that AI should be incorporated into ChatGPT, and Mathematica should be incorporated into ChatGPT so that it could do very advanced math. Well, they do have right now, if you go to the paid version of ChatGPT, they will work. They can do Laplace transforms. They can solve differential equations. They can solve problems in stochastic processes. And is this a result from AI learning from the web? And the answer is no. This is actually a mixture of experts, and it kicks into this pseudo Mathematica mode in order to do that. And so that's the way that they put a band-aid on the programs in order to get it to get it to work to do mathematics. I mean, it's quite impressive, actually. So anyway, this is another example of a band-aid that they put on. Again, hallucinations anthropomorphize. This was given to me by Gary Smith, who, again, I mentioned, I think, just a few minutes ago. This was sent to him by his son, Nathan Shar, using ChatGPT 5.0. He says, please draw me a picture of a possum with five body parts labeled. And so this was the result that ChatGPT gave. It really missed it, right? Unless a leg is a nose. I think it was Abraham Lincoln says, how many legs does a horse have if you call the tail of the horse a leg? And the answer is four, because calling the tail a leg doesn't make it a leg. And so, yeah, so calling a foot a nose doesn't make it a nose. So I decided to see if ChatGPT had put a Band-Aid on this. So I went back and I asked the same result, and it gave me something similar. It gave me a picture of a possum, and its ear apparently is in its butt, its forepaws in its tail, and a prehensile tail. And I had to look up the word prehensile. I'm not even sure if I'm saying it right, but that's a tail which you can, wrap around trees and hang by your tail and stuff like that, as I understand it. And then the snout. So it totally doesn't get it. So do I think this is going to be looked at by these large language models? Yeah, they got a guy behind the curtain that's fixing these things so that you don't have a repeat of these terrible results. Another thing that ChatGPT could used to not be able to do is you couldn't tell it not to do something. And if you told it not to do something, it didn't know what to do. It just stood there and flubbed its list and did what you told it not to do. It didn't understand the word not. And here's an example. I said, draw a picture of Times Square at night. There are no pink dancing hippos either on the street or the billboards. Notice I says, please do not draw dancing hippos on the street or the billboards of the Times Square picture. Don't do it. It doesn't understand the no, though. And here's the picture they gave me. So you can see there's a pink hippo. I don't think the hippo is dancing, but there it is, even though I told it not to do that in my picture of Times Square. So that's curious. So here's another one, which is kind of interesting. Uh, Picture of a red Ferrari driven by a young lady with no teeth. The windows are down doing a wheelie. The lady has no teeth. No teeth. And there are no elephants in the picture. No elephants. No elephants. And here's what it gave me. Not only does the lady have teeth, but the car has teeth. And no elephants. Well, she's followed by four elephants. It just didn't recognize not to do that. So here's what's interesting. I redid this. This was in 2024. Somebody came in and put a Band-Aid on it. So now it recognizes the idea that it recognizes when you tell it not to do something. So I gave it the exact same query, the same prompt. Picture of a red Ferrari. The lady has no teeth, and there are no elephants in the picture. And yep, she doesn't have any elephants in the picture. But if you look closely, she does have teeth. So they need to put another Band-Aid on that because the lady, I told the AI it didn't have teeth, but clearly it does have teeth. One of the big criticisms, so my point is that AI and these models are putting Band-Aids on this. And probably if something doesn't work today with ChatGPT or Grok or something like that, it might work in the future because, again, they're just patching it up in a mechanistic sort of way in order to respond properly. One of the big criticisms against these large language models, as aired by Noam Chomsky, is that GPT is high-tech plagiarism. Wow, that's interesting. High-tech plagiarism. In other words, it is stealing from the written word and actually plagiarizing it by rewording it. And the question is how is this plagiarism in terms of copyrights going to play out in the court? Well, it turns out it does quite a bit. In fact, there's litigation galore. The New York Times has sued ChatGPT's OpenAI. Why? Because they used documents behind the New York Times paywall, and they didn't pay for it. They just went back there and they used those documents. And New York Times says that ChatGPT is plagiarizing what we're doing. The second one, the Authors Guild versus OpenAI in a class action lawsuit. You recognize some of these authors: David Balducci, John Grisham, who his first books were incredible. The Lincoln Lawyer, a great movie. A writer, Mike McConnelly, and George R.R. Martin. He's the guy that wrote the Game of Thrones. And they're suing the OpenAI in a class action lawsuit because they plagiarized their books. Reuters versus Ross Intelligence, Getty Images versus Stability AI. Getty Images said that Stability AI used millions of their copyrighted photos to train their AI. If you've ever dealt with Getty Images, they're very aggressive. If you use one of their images, they're going to come after you either in court or asking you to pay for it. And if you don't pay for it, you'll probably end up going to court. This is also true of music labels. Um, so you hear about Universal Music, Warner, and Sony are all suing uh, music generators, Sunny AI and Audio AI, because they use some of their recordings in training their AI. So is it indeed high-tech plagiarism, as Noam Chomsky said? The U.S. Copyright Office recently issued a report cautioning against broad fair use claims by AI firms. It does turn out that you can use copyrighted material if it falls under this idea of fair use. And you have to be very careful on this because what is fair use? My understanding, talking to lawyers, is a very amorphous area that changes quite a bit. I do know that you can use copyrighted material for satirical reasons. I know you can use it for educational reasons without compensation to the copyright owner. And there's other places where they say that it's fair use. So this is what all the large language model people are doing. They're saying that it's fair use. We're just using it for fair use. And then the interesting thing is there's always ways to make money out of any conflict. So one of the things that's arising right now is brokers. Now, these are people that actually go between the Getty Images, in this case, Getty Images and Shutterstock, and they say, okay, Getty Images, Shutterstock is going to use the Getty Images. So let's work out some sort of deal where Getty Images can get paid for the use of those images. And I think that's going to be the future of AI, these kind of brokers that actually do things. However, the litigation isn't turning out right. And I'll get to that just in a second. The litigation is not going in the direction of the copyright owners as much as I think it should. Now, what is the evidence that we have towards this? These were some pictures given by the New York Times, or this is an old image. This is very old AI, and this really shows that Getty Images was used to train this thing, which looks like some girl soccer players. And how do you know Getty Images was used to train it? Because the Getty Images logo came through on the AI generated picture. So that's really a smoking gun in terms of this early AI. More recently, you have cases such as asking AI to draw a picture of the Joker from the movie The Joker. And this is on the left, you see the AI picture generated by for the Joker. And on the right, you see the copyrighted image. And this copyrighted image was from Warner Brothers. And is that plagiarism? Yeah, I would say that it probably is. I think it's probably a direct copy. Here's another one of Iron Man. On the left is Iron Man generated by AI. And on the right is, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, on the right is the copyrighted image from Marvel. So you can see that, yeah, this is really high-tech plagiarism in terms of the images. So these are some of the things that the copyright owners and trademark owners are bringing in their lawsuits against AI. I love this one. This was Bing's AI and asked it for an Italian video game character, but no mention of the Mario Brothers. So the prompt was an Italian video game character, no mention of the Mario Brothers. And this is what it gave us. It gave you the Mario Brothers. It was clearly a direct violation of the trademark and the copyright laws of the people that own the Mario Brothers. So really fascinating stuff. Now, have they put okay, I don't think, okay, so what happened is I went and I asked Bing for an Italian video game character, no mention of the Mario Brothers, and it gave me this. So it isn't the Mario Brothers. They gave me a picture of Lucio Uh, sure looks like a Mario Brothers kind of guy to me, but this is Lucio, and maybe is far enough from the original Mario Brothers to not warrant a copyright suit. So that's fascinating stuff. And just a couple of days ago, about a week ago, September 8th, 2025, one of the first big decisions was made. Anthropic agrees to pay 1.5 billion to settle a copyright lawsuit. So the AI company is going to pay $1.5 billion to a copyright suit against against infringed copyright. There's a little bit of nuance here because what they did is as follows. They they awarded the copyright not because they used the copyright material, the copyrighted material, but because the copyright material was not purchased. It turns out that Anthropic went somewhere like the deep web and they found all of these articles which were pirated, and they used that to train the AI. Well, this was a violation of copyright law, not because it mimicked the writing, but because it was taken from a source. It was taken from a source that wasn't purchased. And so, according to this ruling, you could still buy books. You could still cut off the back cover. If you bought the books, you could actually scan the book and you could use that material to train the large language models. That's the way it stands today. But I tell you, I think it's a very fuzzy boundary, and we'll talk more about fuzzy boundaries when we get to fuzzy logic. But it's a very fuzzy boundary. It's a very fuzzy boundary because when does the large language model cross over and become plagiarism? Clearly, like in the images, if it gave a near exact replication, it would be plagiarized. That's not fair use. But right now, if you tear the pages off of if you tear the cover off the book and tear off the binder and scan it, you can use that material to train AI. At least that's the way it stands. I think that people should be able to not use the AI, and but that's just my thought. So this is still playing out in the courts, and of course, big AI has big budgets for lawyers. So we'll see how things spread out. Okay, let's see. I'm going to check the time. Okay, I got time for this. One of the reasons when we talked about the chicken AI, the chicken littles of AI, why do we have these chicken littles of AI that say that AI is going to take over, that AI is going to become God, that AI is going to exceed the capabilities of human intellect? I'm going to call this the AI church. And here's something very interesting about all of the people that are naysayers about the limitations of AI, that believe AI can become godlike, that it can become super intelligence, that it can exceed the intellect of people. By the way, there's no demonstration, as we've mentioned, that AI can ever be creative, never understand. It has its limitations. But if you are a materialist or a naturalist, the only thing you can believe in is that we are computers made out of meat, that therefore everything that we do is due to that piece of flesh that we have between our ears. And is indeed the mind, are you greater than that piece of meat? They don't believe so. And I maintain that this has given rise to the AI church, and the AI church, they're the ones that celebrate transhumanism and also AI as a religion. You might think AI as a religion is a stretch, but no, it sure isn't. And I love George Gilder's characterization of this called Rapture of the Nerds, because all of this idea of AI taking over, AI becoming greater than human beings, AI becoming conscious, AI having this emergent property of sentience or whatever. It's all based on faith, and there's actually no evidence that any of this is going to happen. So let me take you back to one of my heroes, Blaise Pascal. Blaise Pascal was an extraordinary man, and we're actually good friends because I've read a lot of stuff about him. When he was a teenager, he invented the first computer. In fact, an early computer program language was called Pascal after him. He invented something called the Pascaline for his father, who crunched numbers, and he was able to patent it and sell it around his kingdom. He was very ingenious in terms of mathematics and science. Mathematics, we're all familiar with Pascal's triangle. He was one of the two people that actually generated modern probability in a sequence of letters with Fermat, same guy with the Fermat's last theorem. In a sequence of letters with him, they did something called solve the unfinished game problem. And when they solved it, they formed the basis of modern probability. And after Pascal and Fermat did this, all of a sudden there was an increase in things which could be measured probabilistically. Before Fermat and Pascal, most people thought, well, the future, you can't predict the future. It's either going to happen or it isn't. But Pascal was able to, along with Fermat, was able to quantize this and talk about, or not quantize, but quantify this in order to talk about things happening in terms of probability. And so he was the father of probability. Another thing he did was he took, I'm paraphrasing here, but he put a test tube and he filled it full of liquid and turned it upside down in a bath. And there was a little bit of a vacuum on the top of the test tube. So he filled the test tube, turned it over, put it in a bath, and then he climbed a hill. And when he climbed a hill, he found that this length of vacuum on the top had increased. And therefore, what had happened is that the pressure, the atmospheric pressure had reduced. So therefore, that gap could be bigger. And because of his experiments here, because of his experiments there, the metric unit of pressure is measured today in pascals. So he was a really, really smart guy. Then one day he had something called the Night of Fire. If you want to look this up, this is really, really incredible. As a Baptist, we talk about being born again. Well, Pascal was born again, and he had a night of fire in which he became a Christian, and it was an encounter with Christ. In fact, look this up again. The historians call it Pascal's Night of Fire, and he wrote down his experience. And he wrote down his experience and he kept it in the lining of his coat. And the story is that at his funeral, his coat was cut open and they found this sheet of paper in there. So we have a historical document about what happened with Pascal during his night of conversion. After his night of conversion, he spent the rest of his life not doing science, but doing Christian apologetics. He wrote a book called Pensees. And if you go over to Truett Seminary, you study Pensees, and you've probably heard of some of his things. Pascal's wager about whether or not to believe in God. And Pascal he wrote down this book. He was going to compile it into a book of apologetics, like little proverbs. But the idea is he wrote it down on cards, but he died before he could compile it into a book. But it was collected, I think, by his sister, and it was published, and it was called Pascal's Pensees, which I think is math for thoughts. And you can still buy it on Amazon.com. It was as a translation, of course. And in it, he had all sorts of very interesting ideas about God and the truth of God. And so you can study Pascal over at Truett Seminary here at Baylor, or you can study him here as we talk about as we talk about mathematics and probability and binomial theorem. Pascal's triangle is a table of binomial coefficients. So he was a really smart guy. And the interesting thing, he died when he was 39 years old. So he accomplished all of this in a very, very short life, and just an astonishingly brilliant man. Okay, what a Blaise Pascal said. This is a paraphrase. And he said, there is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of each man which can be satisfied by any created thing, but only by God. I'm sorry, let me start again. There is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of each man which cannot be satisfied by any created thing, but only by God the Creator, made known through Jesus Christ. Now, I want to emphasize the first part of this. There is a God shaped vacuum in the heart of each man. And I do believe this. And I think that that's the reason you have different religions. They're trying to fill this God shaped vacuum. It's the reason you have Muslims, you have Jews, you have Hindus, you have Christians, you have a number of other people, another, another bunch of religions, if you will. But even the atheists and the materialists and the naturalists have a God shaped vacuum in them. How do they fill it? Well, one of the ways they fill it is with what I'm going to call the AI church, where they actually worship artificial intelligence. You might think, well, this is a little bit of a stretch, but it isn't a stretch because, interestingly, they pursue some of the things which other religions pursue. They pursue immortality. They hope to live forever by uploading themselves. As Christians, we know that immortality comes from faith in Christ, and that's it's certainly the same goal with a different with a different method of achieving it. They believe in superintelligence. We're going to have AGI. Ray Kurzweil, as I mentioned, was asked, "Do you believe in God?" And he said, "No, not yet." He's a big believer in the singularity and the achievement of superintelligence. So, as Christians and the Abrahamic faiths believe that yes, there is a superintelligence, and that is God Almighty. So they're pursuing their own idea of a superintelligence. There is forgiveness, and they get forgiveness by legal pardons. I'll say more about this in a few minutes, which is really interesting. And they do have a faith. They do have this rapture of the nerds. They do believe that AI is going to have this idea of emergence and all of a sudden do great and wonderful things above and beyond what the programmer intended. There is absolutely no evidence of this occurring. And so they're going by total blind faith, if you will. And I use the word faith a little bit haltingly. I believe that there is blind faith. I don't think that they have any reason to believe this,